All right, it is finally contract season. We got done with the boring disc golf season. Boo, Snorfest. All right, now we get to the interesting stuff. People be moving, and I think there's so much potential that we need to talk about. Let's get into it. Oh my goodness, craziness could happen. All right, future me, I'm feeling like garbage right now, but doesn't matter. But I have included chapters, so if you want to click through specific players that you want to see the most, just skip through the chapters and see which ones you like the most. All right, back to the video. All right, so starting off with somebody you probably kind of forgot about, Paige Pierce is actually ending her 4-year contract with Discraft this year, and we know Paige has had kind of like a not so good season. She's been injured. When she wasn't injured, she only won, I think it was Texas State's. I don't think she won anything else. And one thing to note here is that she has nothing about Discraft anywhere on her Instagram bio. And we have posts about Discraft stuff coming out with limited time Paige Pierce grip bag. But a lot of people do have continuing sponsorships with Grip, but they often do not have continuing sponsorships with their actual disc manufacturer. So a crazy potential occurrence would be Paige Pierce signs with somebody else. Maybe she goes back to Dynamic. I don't know, but this does seem to be the point in her career where she is probably not going to win a ton more for the remaining future. She's definitely on the downward trend, I would say. Still has a massive potential to win a decent amount of tournaments, but the peak of her career is most likely coming to an end. So she might pull a Paul Macbeth and sign a 10-year deal, but that does not mean that it has to be with Discraft. Now, it obviously would be a shocking occurrence to have Paige leave. She has so many Signature Series discs that lots of people love and continue to buy. But as we have seen with people like Simon, even if you have a huge line of discs, that does not mean that you are not willing to walk away from that company. So I do think, while it is very, very, very unlikely, she could potentially leave Discraft, leaving Discraft with a still good number of players, like, don't get me wrong, but it would still be a shocking thing that I think people are not talking about enough because it is very much possible. All right, so staying on track with Discraft, Aaron Gossage ends his 1-year extension this year, and I definitely don't think he probably will be moving, but I do think he has so much potential. He almost won Worlds, almost won Portland. He has had a good show of events. He just can't seem to pull it together when it comes to those last couple putts, and I do think while Aaron Gossage is very, very good and talented, I do think he might get a little bit overshadowed by the other big names at Discraft. So just to run it down, we have Adam Hammis, Anthony Varela, obviously Paul Macbeth, Ezra Aderhold, Paul Uleberry, Brody Smith. There's a lot of range to Discraft MPO, and I don't know that Aaron is getting the proper value for how good of a player he truly is at Discraft. So while I don't think he will leave, I definitely think he might move to maybe say a DGA or some other brand that definitely will reassess his value. And even though player contracts are probably not the same as they were even just last year, I do think he can still make a move and get a good hefty contract. All right, so before we get into the other ones, we got to talk about it. Gannon, Buhr, Alden, Harris, will they leave Prodigy? And I've been thinking about this for so incredibly long. I love this picture. And I think, I mean, there's been discussions that he's already signed with Discmania. There's been discussions like maybe he'll move to MVP. Like he could be a crush cousin with Simon. I think, honestly, I think that because ties were so like fragile and they've built up this rapport month after month after the lawsuit, that I do think Alden Harris and Gannon Buhr will make an extension with Prodigy. I think there's just so much good that comes from that. And I think the positive press for Prodigy to keep these players on their team is very, very valuable. Now, we do know Prodigy does not hold on to players very well. They lost Catrina Allen, they lost Dickerson. But just seeing the social media and the huge amount of love for these two players, I do think Prodigy really has to work super, super hard to keep these players on Prodigy. But I do think that will end up being the case. I know people have said like they've already signed with Discmania. I don't think so. I think we would have seen a lot more about it if that were to be the case. So I do think, even though I'm going to be talking about a lot of moves, I do think even though it seems crazy, Gannon Buhr and Alden Harris, I believe, will stay with Prodigy. All right, so if you just watched the amazing post from Simon where he had a collab with Kevin, let's talk about Kevin. Again, Prodigy Boy has the fattest stacks on Prodigy, and I do not see any reason why he would leave. But you know what? He is straight chilling, and I think it's evidenced by the latest video, ... So I've actually done a little bit of research, and I think I know who he will sign with next. He won't be leaving Prodigy. No, he has something way bigger and way more influential in the sport. The local Charlotte, North Carolina cannabis company It's C-Trax. Don't forget the name. It will be a mainstay for Kevin Jones' bag. Compliant for sale for cannabis and high-risk retailers. I think we need to see the true value of Kevin Jones's hobbies outside of disc golf, outside of DJing, and just like Lone Star making the most out of the dog sponsorship, let's make Kevin the most out of the bong that he had to have in the video with Simon. So jokes aside, Kevin's going to stay. No way around that. He's definitely going to stay. He has got the best deal. Not playing great, but doesn't matter. He's getting paid, getting his DJ stuff going, and it is just good stuff. I would like to see him improve. Obviously, like if he could get more money after getting a couple wins next year, that'd be sick, but we'll see. All right, on to Double G. This was something that I found very interesting. A lot of people don't talk about Double G very much, honestly, but looking at his setup, he actually makes so much from stuff that isn't disc golf. He hasn't had the best of years. He's kind of on the downtrend, I think. But staying with Innova, I think, is the most likely situation because I presume him to have great paychecks from his Double G Wraiths. I think those perform very well. I see so many players with them. And then he has Halo Sonic. I don't actually see too many people throwing Sonics, but if it has any similar trends to the Wraiths, then I think it'll perform very well. And not only that, but he also has some Infinite discs. He has an Emperor and a Millennium Sabbath. And he has one other disc, a NFL Wombat 3. And so while he does have a little bit of everything for Signature Series discs, with the majority of his revenue, I presume, to be coming from Innova, I do think it is very possible for Garret to sign with, say, a smaller company like a DGA and just kind of have his retirement-esque contract similar to Paul, where you can just throw the remainder of your career with one company, not having to worry about crazy contracts because it is just so unknown. And I think Garret is one of those players that just has so much revenue streams outside of his actual play that it just doesn't really matter how he performs for the remainder of his career. He's going to be known as a bomber, and people want to throw discs that they believe will throw very far. So I think it is very much in his wheelhouse to sign with another company and continue to throw bomber discs and continue to sell those discs. All right, so speaking of Crush Boys, we got to talk about your boy Eagle. Still currently selling Rainmakers. I think it is probably going to be his biggest source of revenue with Discmania at the moment, assuming that Cloudbreakers aren't really being sold that often, which I don't know that they are. But quick rundown, Discmania currently just has Niklas, Eagle, and Kyle. And I don't think Niklas or Kyle are going anywhere. So Eagle's contract is up this year. We really don't know what his future will look like disc golf wise. He still is kind of recovering from his injury. I think it still might take a little bit of time to fully recover. He already makes a decent amount from his Signature Series discs, and he certainly has a lot of them as well. So is it potentially possible that he will sign with MVP, become a Crush Boy again? I don't know. I do think it would be insane to see him sign with MVP. I think with the weirdness of MVP's discs, I love MVP, but they do have a very unique set of discs that might actually line up with Eagle's kind of like philosophy and style. He loves to be a little bit quirky, but I think Discmania has been so supportive with Eagle through his injuries, through everything, that I just don't foresee that happening. I think he really is just the face of Discmania right now. So while Discmania would be terrified to lose him, I think Eagle might be terrified to lose Discmania. So seeing that kind of symbiotic relationship, I think Eagle will most likely stay. But man, it certainly would be crazy if Discmania had Kyle, Gannon, Alden, and Eagle. So from one Discmania boy to the next, let's talk about Niklas. Niklas is kind of just like feeling it. He has had a great stretch of disc golf, and I truly believe he is one of the current greats in the sport. Sure, he doesn't have the same number of wins as other players, but I think week after week, he continues to show himself as a phenomenal putter, phenomenal controlled distance, and basically no shot shape that he cannot perform well. So seeing how consistently well he is doing and seeing how his actual paycheck does not reflect that, evidenced by a Finnish tax report, because I guess Finnish records are public, so you can see how much people are making in Finland. It wasn't that much. So a big extension would be required for him to stay at Discmania. I think Discmania is well worth paying for him, but I also believe that he is such a big player in Europe that him signing for Prodigy and kind of representing Prodigy Europe would be a very good signing for Prodigy, and it would certainly reflect very well for his paycheck because he is just so solid, and I think he has a lot more value for Prodigy than he does for Discmania. All right, so now on to the conspiracy theory portion. So if you're not aware, which I bet a lot of you already are, Chris Clemons had the name DD Clemonade. standing for Dynamic Disc Chris Clemons. Currently, it says DG Lemonade. And even though he is repping Dynamic in his profile, he's being a good athlete, the only reason why he would change that name is because he's wanting to be more of a disc golfer and less of a Dynamic Disc Pro player. And so I don't know where he belongs. Honestly, I don't think he's performing that well consistently. He does have a couple of good finishes throughout the year like he did last year and the year before. But I think the trend for Chris isn't necessarily going up, but I do love him as a player, and I would really like to see some crazy moves happen. And I think, once again, very similar to kind of like a Marweed-esque player, I think he would perform very, very well for DGA and be kind of in that like interesting lefty forehand player for DGA. And I think it would do a lot of good for him and DGA, whereas currently his disc for Dynamic, I don't think probably sell all that well. And speaking of Dynamic disc players, let's talk about Gavin Rathbun. So Gavin's been hurt for the last like 2 years, shoulder injury, shoulder surgery. Dynamic has been very supportive about his process and improving. And although he hasn't really performed very well since his injury, and he's kind of restructured his entire form, I do think he is potentially one of the greatest players in the sport at the moment. We just don't see it very much because he's still trying to figure out like his rhythm and the way that he wants to play without injuring himself. So it is a very, very difficult thing because re-injury is very possible for shoulder injuries. But I think so many people forget about it, that Gavin was a top 5 player 2 years ago. He was a phenomenal player that continued to be a great player week after week. And then he just had a huge drop off with the injury. And while it would definitely be a little bit of a harsh move for him to leave, I do think it is very possible that Gavin signs with anybody else. I don't know who that would be. I don't really know where he would fit, but it certainly would be very interesting to see where that would end up. All right, so speaking about controversial things, let's get to Lone Star Boys. First up, we got to have Emerson Keith. I don't really foresee any world where he doesn't re-sign with Lone Star because I think he's probably getting paid pretty well. Got a baby on the way. So he will currently have 3 kids, and I think he's like right around 26, 27. So he's got a full family, and I do think he's getting a lot of support, and being from Texas, Lone Star is probably doing their best to make it worth his while. But with that said, his contract does end. He's a little cutthroat at times. Let's be real. He's probably a very nice dude, but he can be a little cutthroat. So him leaving Lone Star, even if they gave him a lot of support, would not be totally shocking. I think Emerson, with his win this year, has a potential to have a very good value increase from what he has at Lone Star. Now, with his controversial nature, I don't know that many people will want to sign with Emerson. Like, there's just been so much negative press, similar to Nico at Lone Star. But with that said, OTB champ, he definitely has a good enough potential to sign a good contract somewhere else. So maybe he will come back to Trilogy and become a Dynamic Disc boy. I don't really know for sure, but I do think while a lot of people don't foresee this as being anything interesting, I think there is a world where he does actually leave. And since we're on the topic of Lone Star, let's talk about Robert Burridge. A very young pro, has had a good amount of finishes that you just don't really expect to be that good. Like his battle with Simon at the Des Moines Challenge, there is definitely some merit to him being more than just a Lone Star pro. And I think it is very much a potential because he has a lot of potential to so many manufacturers out there. And I think Lone Star is trying to grab everybody that they possibly can, but that does not mean that his value is being seen properly with Lone Star. So him leaving is very much possible, I do think. All right, so on to some of the FPO players. I didn't really talk about this too much because I don't think it's super interesting. So we have Catrina Allen ending her contract this year with DGA. I think with her Signature Series discs that are performing pretty well. Sure, her play has been kind of abysmal recently, but I think her value to DGA is just so incredibly high that I do not foresee her leaving anytime soon. And then same with Missy Gannon. Her with Discraft is just a very, very good symbiotic relationship. Everybody benefits. Everybody recognizes the value pretty well. I do think she'll get a decent uptick in her contract because she is fighting week after week for a win, whereas very few players really anywhere on MPO or FPO are really making that much of a push towards a win. So I think she'll be getting a little bit more money, but she will definitely still remain with Discraft. All right, so now we have to talk about the most wild card of wild cards, Hailey King. I have no idea if she will stay. I think it is so incredibly likely that she remains at Innova because like she has a good amount of money being made. She is a great player for Innova, and I truly believe she's like one of the most wild and unpredictable players in FPO. So she could leave, and I would not be shocked. I think a lot of people forget that she can win basically any tournament any week. She can also get like 20th any tournament any week. But with that said, Innova still has Owens Goggins, Kat Murch, Holly Finley, Hannah Blumroos, Evelina Salonen, a lot of top tier FPO players. So having Hailey is very valuable, but maybe it's just too much and Hailey wants to get better value somewhere else. It's definitely possible. And with her unpredictable nature, I think anything can happen. And then last up, there's one person that I wanted to talk about, and that is Juliana Korver. So obviously we know this is her last year. She's done being a pro tour athlete, but she still has the JK AVR. She still has a lot of positive value to Innova. So is this going to be a weird situation where she is still signed with Innova and gets like royalty checks, or like does she have to be an unsigned player and still get checks? I don't really know, but I was kind of thinking about it because her contract ends 2023 with Innova. And so I was just wondering, like, can she still be with Innova and not be a touring pro and just kind of play maybe one event a year? I don't know, but it does pose a very interesting question. So I wanted to add that in there. And so that concludes all the potential craziness that might be coming this fall and winter. It is a lot more than you probably have guessed, because so many people are just talking about, oh yeah, like Gannon is going to Discmania. Oh my goodness. But there's already a lot more interesting things that could potentially happen than Gannon going to Discmania. Like Eagle leaving, Paige Pierce leaving, Hailey King going literally anywhere else. Chris Clemons potentially having like beef with Dynamic. Like I don't know why he changed his name. That is a very interesting thing to do if you currently still have good ties with Dynamic. There's so much going on, and I really want to find it out, and you'll be the first to know about it as soon as I do. So be sure to subscribe and follow for more. Thank you guys so much for watching, and let me know all the rumors you have about players switching teams, anything crazy. I want to know about it. So be sure to comment down below. Wild Runs, signing out. Peace.